All right, so let me share the screen here. All right, so we're going to do an example video for the Zodiac and the Environment series to kind of round that out and help you guys see how the environments, like how you can really see what I was talking about. I mean, I try to give examples, but this will be a little bit more technical with an actual chart in front of you so that you can really see what is going on. All right, so starting out, Rahu, Sun, it was around this time. I don't know exactly when, but around this time, this person moved from Kentucky to Charleston, South Carolina. They lived in a rural part of Kentucky most of their life, and they were running that Rahu period most of their life. So where's Rahu at in their Rashi chart? It's in Taurus, which is the sign of small towns, villages, rural farmland areas, nice supportive areas to raise kids and to grow up in, you know, suburbs and things like that. Taurus is a sign of growth, you know, places that are nice, formative, growing environments for kids, things like that. So Rahu in Taurus during this dasha, yeah, they grew up in that sort of environment. And then also just that isn't enough of a reason. Not everyone who has Rahu in Taurus in the 7th is going to always do that. The other reason is because Jupiter, Sun, and Saturn are in Taurus in the chaturthamsa, the 4th Varga, and the 4th from Mars. And Jupiter, well, not Jupiter, but Sun is the Atmakaraka, and then Saturn is the ruling planet. So these are both self factors. So that's definitely setting him up for karma to live in nice environments. Taurus usually is a good environment to have a home. You know, the moon is exalted there. So he's lived in, you know, mostly good places in his life and mostly a lot of like small town, suburb type areas. But then at some point towards the end of this Rahu Dasha, he moved to Charleston, South Carolina. And that can, I don't know exactly the exact date. I might have to ask him. But I think it was definitely in the Rahu Sun Antardasha, I believe. And that makes sense because Rahu in the 7th makes you want to travel. That's just one basic placement for someone who's going to travel a lot is having Rahu in the 7th. Because Ketu in the 1st makes one feel too stuck and myopic in their ways. And so they have to go out and see the world and see what's going on and open their mind and have preconceived conditions from the past lives be dissolved and be squashed as they're doing that. Like that saying, travel is fatal to prejudice or whatever. I'm not saying he was prejudiced, but just in general, it's like there is an experience that needs to be had for him traveling. And this person has also traveled a lot in their life. And that can be seen from a number of angles. We definitely see that because of Rahu being in the 7th. We also see it because there's a Jupiter retrograde in the 4th that can make one want to travel a lot. The 3rd Lord is on the ascendant. That makes one want to do a lot of short distance journeys within your own nation, which is what he has done a lot. On 2 different times in his life, he's traveled across the country of the United States, which is a very vast area. But since it's still within one's nation, it still does come up with the 3rd house things a lot. The 7th Lord and the 9th, that Venus yoga, that's a yoga for doing travel or pilgrimages. And then that 9th Lord in the 12th is even further indicating that he will travel a lot. I think there's even more if I look. But yeah, so he has a lot of yogas for travel to begin with in the Rashi chart. If you didn't see those, then he wouldn't, then just these things, just having Rahu in the 7th probably wouldn't make him travel a ton. But yeah, he traveled a lot. He had that urge. And then Sun, Rahu's Sun is in the 4th from there. So again, an emphasis on home, finding a new home, creating a kingdom, the Sun. And then the Sun has manifesting strength, and it's also manifesting Mars, the planet of property. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. yeah, so he had the itch to leave his small town of Kentucky. Makes perfect sense. But he also was going through like a spiritual catharsis too, from what I understood. And he was telling me that he was a lot more, sort of more materialistic or more worldly, and you know, drove a BMW and had a nice watch and nice things, and got really disgusted with that at some point. And that can happen when you have K2 and Saturn in Scorpio. In general, you can have a transformative time in your life. And then Rahu in the 7th in Taurus is a major worldly grasping placement. And so these karmas he was running with Rahu in the beginning of his life weren't like the real him. They weren't his real self. They were more like these unconscious sanskaras that have come out from whatever, for whatever reason, from past lives. And then towards the end of that Rahu Dasha, he could feel those things waning. You know what I mean? And then when the sun Antardasha kicks in, makes sense that he would kind of wake up a little bit more, because the sun is about light and is the opposite of Rahu. It's about clarity. And the sun is his Atmakaraka. And he has a strong sun. It's in Leo. His sun is ridiculously strong. I'll show you the Shadbala. No, that one. Look at, that's like one of the most ridiculous suns I've ever seen with Shadbala. So he's like, okay, I got to do something. I got to get out of this town. And then I know that at this point, I know that at least around the time of the Rahu moon period, from September of 2009 to 2011, he was living, it wasn't during that whole period, but at one point during that time when I got to know him, he was living in a very expensive and very nice and kind of lavish one-bedroom apartment on King Street, like above the stores and the commercial area. And King Street is like the main area, the main street on Charleston, right in the center of town, about 100 feet from Marion Square, above the Moe's Southwest Grill, and the above the Upper Deck Bar, which was it's an old bar in Charleston and a dive bar. And I like saying these things because I like to date things, because Charleston is changing so fast, and you know, I have Saturn in the 10th, so to me everything's always changing too fast, and I like to think back on the way things were. So hopefully I'll watch this video later on in life, or someone else will, and they'll have been to the Upper Deck maybe, or to that street. But anywho, he lived right above that street, King Street, right at King and Calhoun Street, where Marion Square is, the center of town. He lived 100 feet from it. My point is that he was right in the center of the city, in the urban environment. And Rahu moon, well, Rahu loves to, you know, have those unconscious worldly city type energies around him. And then, well, not every Rahu, but that's a Rahu thing for sure. And then moon, well, look at moon. Moon is in the 12th, and it's in Libra. The 12th this was not a 12th house environment really, except for his house, and his room was great. He had a little meditation room and everything, and it was very quiet. But moon is in Libra. Libra is the sign of cities and social areas, and especially commerce areas. So he lived right above one of the main streets for commerce. This is the same street that, like, just a little bit further down, you would see like the Gucci store, or the Louis Vuitton store, or the Apple store. These are all stores that were just within, you know, a stone's throw of him. Now, with the thing that I think the 12th house comes is expenses. It was a very expensive apartment, of course, to live there. It's even more now. It's so expensive now because Charleston has expanded a lot since then. But that 12th house has to do with expenditure. So he spent a lot of money to live here, but he liked it, and this was good for him. This was what he needed at this time. And that Rahu moon kind of shows it. And then he went into a Rahu-Mars period, and then he moved more to the outskirts of the city, and part of it that was developing, and he lived with a metal worker, an older woman who worked with jewelry and worked with metal and even made some leather and things. And that's kind of neat because Rahu-Mars Well, Mars deals with metals as well as Rahu. Rahu and Mars both deal with metals. This woman worked with gemstones and things too. Mars, people that work with gemstones and cut gems and work with the minerals and the material of the earth are often always related to or ruled by Mars. We have to remember that Mars's name in Vedic astrology is Kuja, which means one born from the earth, like the story of Virabhadra being born out of the earth. And Mars is always a self-made person and someone who works with their earth and with what they have and stuff. Anyways, I don't want to go too much into that, but yeah, Mars rules wealth from the earth. So during this Rahu-Mars period, they had a roommate and they had a neighbor, which they didn't have before. And Mars also relates to roommates and neighbors and teammates. And they did work. This woman, her husband was an inventor, like this really cool kind of like almost mad scientist, engineer, inventor guy. And that's who my friend was really wanting to engage with and learn from. And he was learning all these cool things. And this guy is an engineer and a real builder and a mover and a shaker. He's an IT. You can see all these things in his chart. Maybe I'll do other examples later to show that. So he was learning a lot during this time from a fellow teammate, you know, Rahu-Mars. And then, and this was still in the city, and then Mars is in K2 in Aquarius, another urban air sign, social sign. And he was living near a lot of bars and places of liquor cellars and things. Well, you know, that's what Aquarius is said to relate to in Yavana Jatika. But also, what I relate Aquarius to is, in modern context, is like the ghetto parts of town or the more hood or areas of town where more sketchy things happen. And he was living in one of those parts of town during this Rahu-Mars period. Then, by the time the Jupiter period came, Jupiter, Antardasha, he came to move out to John's Island, which is more of a rural, very country, kind of left alone island, one of the barrier islands off the coast of Charleston, South Carolina, and much further away from the city and further away from the action. So now we're running this Jupiter thing. Jupiter is in Aquarius. It wasn't like on that exact day that he moved, so he was still living in the more of the hood area of downtown Charleston during some of this time with Aquarius, you see. But then he moved out of John's Island, and one thing I already have said, if you watch the videos, Aquarius rules islands. So he lived on an island during the Jupiter period, and Jupiter is in Aquarius. So that should make sense. Also, during some of this during two different points during these Jupiter Antardasha, he traveled around the country as well. And then when he came back from his second time, he lived with me for just a short time in the Jupiter-Saturn Antardasha. And that's funny because I live in a marsh environment, and if you look at his Navamsha, he does have that Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn, the sign of the marsh, like I have already said, is what my house is related to. And then during this Jupiter-Saturn, he did live with me for a few months. But then he got called to get a job opportunity up in Western North Carolina, and he took it. And that brought him back up to a mountainous area, but it's a little bit of the Aries mountainous quality, but then also he lives in a nice little farmland town, a town that grows apple orchards, and is a very sleepy Taurus, nice little suburb village. So there's also some Taurus qualities going on. At first I looked for Aries and I wasn't really satisfied. So there's a little bit of both Aries and Taurus going on at that, you know, with where he's at now. and he's been there. I think he's just about to move, but he's been there from this time until 2017 till the Jupiter-Mercury period, which he's about to move, and that makes sense, but I might not get to that. But the Jupiter-Saturn, look at the D4, the Chaturthamsa again. Jupiter and Saturn are both in the 4th from Mars and the 4th from the ascendant in Taurus. So there's definitely Jupiter-Saturn period brings them back into more of a Taurian environment, more of a farmland environment. And then also I did notice, in the D45, Saturn is in Aries, so that does bring, and it's conjunct the 4th cusp, fallen though, but that does bring in a quality of the mountains. So he did live in a mountainous area, and that does bring in a little bit of that. And I think I saw it somewhere else too. And in the Navamsa, Aries is the 4th from Jupiter and Saturn as well. So there's a little bit of that Aries quality, but it was more of also a lot of these Taurian qualities going on as well while he lived in Western North Carolina. And Jupiter also rules orchards, and where he lives, right when you pull out of a street, there are all these big apple orchards, and they also grow a lot of tomatoes, but they're well known for their apples, and they do make very good apple cider there. So really the coolest thing though about this example that I want to give as just a little tidbit, his home in the mountains where he lives, and where he has during this Jupiter-Saturn period, has the best water I've ever drank. It has water that comes right off of a mountain stream that never runs out at the top of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which are technically a rainforest because they receive so much rain. The water filters down, and it goes right into his house, into his shower, and down. Then there's another one that goes down to the spigot at the bottom. And every time I go there, I fill up as many jugs of water as I can because I'm obsessed with pure water, because I'm an Aquarius swamp shit. I'm just weird about it. I can taste like anything in water that's not supposed to be there. And it's funny because this water really, really delights me and really, really pleases me. And my ruling planet in Amakara is Jupiter. So it's funny how Jupiter in Aquarius, in the sign of the water bearer, is being delighted by Mars and the Sun, which are his self planets. So he really delights me with bearing water, Aquarius. And yeah, so it's got to be this Jupiter retrograde in Aquarius, being ruled by Saturn, the other planet of water bearing. Jupiter's about humanitarian things, but isn't essentially a planet of clean water, but he purifies everything and makes things more sattvic. It's got to be something to do with that, doesn't it? And during this Jupiter-Saturn period, the Dasha and Antardasha of both of these planets and their energies running. And then also notice that his Lagna in the D4 chart is Aquarius, the sign of the water bearer. And it has K2, and that K2's Lord is delighted. And K2 deals with past life karmas, K2 with Mars. He must have done something good with water purity or property or purification in past life, like, I don't know, kept a well clean or something with other people didn't. I don't know what it was, but he has definitely gotten that merit to have just the most amazing water for his shower, for everything. He said that he was supposed to clean the filter every few months. He didn't do it for like a year at one point, and he went and looked and changed the filter, and there was nothing in there. Like, it never needed to be filtered. So that's pretty cool. As an Aquarian individual myself, I find that enviable. He's also built a tiny house too. One of the first people to build a tiny house, which is now very hip. Maybe I'll do another example on that. I'll let you guys try to figure that out in the meantime. Okay, I hope you all enjoy this video. Thank you.